Slapstick was Kurt Vonnegut's 8th novel and was published in 1976. Just like everything else he's written, it's weird and provocative in its own way. However, despite how uncomfortable it is, just like everything else that I've read, it's worth it. Kurt Vonnegut is a very good author, regardless of how muddled his themes can be sometimes. Kurt Vonnegut had at one point gone through and, rated each of his books, and he gave Slapstick a D, which is a bit harsh in my opinion. Now granted, he's comparing it, I don't know exactly what his terms are, against his own stuff, against other authors' work, whatever, but I think D is too hard of a rating to give this book. He was a little uncharitable to himself. There are problems with this book. There are a lot of weird things in this book. Comparing this to the other Vonnegut novels that I've read thus far, though, it's not the worst, but it is far, far from the best. Slapstick is a very short book. In first edition hardback, it comes out to 243 pages. That's about 56,000 words, again, very short. It is a satire above everything else. There's bits of science fiction, bits of science fantasy, urban fantasy, so on and so forth. But above all, Vonnegut is a satirist. He makes fun of things. He sees life as he puts it in the introduction to this book here in the preface, it's just slapstick to him. It's slapstick comedy. That's all it really is, and that's why he named the book the way that it did. So let's go ahead and get into the plot and the prose. Dr. Wilbur Daffodil 11 Swain lives in the ruins of New York City during the decline of the United States, writing his autobiography and collecting candlesticks. He writes of his twin sister, Eliza, now deceased, and how they shared a super intelligence when in contact with each other. After her death, Dr. Swain begins his political career, culminating in his presidency and his somewhat successful Lonesome No More policy. And though his guidance fails to save the country, millions of Americans embrace and continue the Lonesome No More policy even after kings and dukes usurp power in various states. This is honestly the best that I can do to describe this book. There is a lot more that ends up happening in Slapstick. I left out a great many number of the plot points, and for a book as short as it is really just jam-packed with various different plot points. A lot of these pieces of the story, you sit there wondering, like, how is this possibly going to fit into any of the rest of this? You think that he's maybe just thrown it out just to have some weird joke or some weird absurd thing. No, he ends up tying everything together fairly tidily by the end of this book, with one notable exception. We'll get to that in a little bit. The prose itself, the actual delivery, the sentence-to-sentence delivery that we're given is really awkward, as Kurt Vonnegut is wont to be. He really likes to be wandering and meandering, but also very sardonic and witty and kind of scathing in his own almost light and kind-hearted way. Rarely ever seems to meander too far into absolute pessimism. The farthest that he goes into pessimism really just kind of loops itself into comedy. He only talks about the absurd, horrible, bad stuff, but kind of in light of trying to laugh at it and make light of it. The majority of this book is written in the first person in past tense, written from Dr. Swain's point of view, as I mentioned in the small synopsis a moment ago. Not all of it, however. There is a prologue at the beginning, which is written specifically from Kurt Vonnegut's point of view. Vonnegut often starts his stories talking about himself or his family or situations that he himself has been through, and he kind of lays out the themes and a lot of the ideas early on in his book in these prologues or these introductions. He relies, as usual, on some mnemonic devices. Slaughterhouse-5 had its So It Goes. This one has hi-ho. He refers to hi-ho as just a verbal hiccup. I'm not entirely certain what he meant by that. I'm not 100% certain why he chose to include the hi-ho in this book, but it does end up giving it its own specific and unique flavor. There's really doesn't seem to be a rhyme or a reason as to why or when he'll drop a hi-ho, but he does, a lot. In discussing the characters, there's really only two of them that have to actually be talked about, and that's Wilbur Swain and his twin Eliza Swain, right? You kind of have to talk about them both a little bit together and apart because they're so intrinsically linked, and yet the story is only told from one of their points of view. This book is very much about the relationship between these two twins, and then how it changes and drives one of them when the other one ends up dying. A lot of the themes and ideas in this book, at least, really revolve around these two characters. All of the other characters are important, the ones that show up, the supporting characters, but the rest are in my opinion, much better to just discover in the actual act of reading. Dr. Wilbur Swain is, of course, the protagonist. He's the one that we actually hear from his point of view. It is, again, first person from his point of view specifically. It's easy to like him because he's just, all he really wants is family, and just kind of people to get along and to be happy and to not be alone, right? That's really what he wants. He's responsible for Lonesome No More as a campaign slogan, although that is lifted from work that he did with his sister earlier. What he tries to do with his political power is not a good idea, but the heart is there. It's just as smart as it is stupid in a lot of ways. Another really important thing to note is that the twins are deformed, like hideously deformed is how they're described. You know, they each have like several nipples and 6 fingers on each hand, and they're both precisely like 6 feet tall. I always imagined them to have purple skin in my head. Like, I don't know why. I'm not certain if Vonnegut even mentioned that they do have purple skin or not, but in my mind, this is the color of purple that I imagined. Even though I do like Wilbur, generally speaking, Eliza is a lot harder to like. You know, now granted, she's not exactly happy with her situation. The only thing that I really have against her is just how specifically she feels about love. Now, granted, I can't really knock her opinions on that because of the life that she lived and the way that her family reacts to her versus how she reacts to her brother. I understand how she feels about a lot of things. I know why she gets to feeling different than the way that Wilbur does. It does just make me sad, right? You know, it is a bit tragic, of course, what happens to Eliza. This whole thing, of course, is a tragedy. It's a tragic comedy, so of course it's not going to leave me satisfied at the end of the day in an emotional way. But unfortunately, even though I don't really like Eliza, she was written the way she needs to be written for the story to come across as well as it had. And again, everyone else that I read about in this book was perfectly fine characters for the most part. You know, there's one character specifically whose name probably doesn't age very well, but you know, the book was written in the 1970s. What can you do? We have now reached the spoiler section of the video, so if you don't want any spoilers, have a good day. So, let's go ahead and just talk about the incest then, why don't we? Oh boy, I love talking about that shit on my channel. I'm gonna go ahead and start by saying that there is no subject matter that is off the table when it comes to fiction. There's hard subject matter that is really difficult to write about in a way that feels real and not just, you know, twisted in for shock value reasons that are more marketable than for the sake of the art itself. You have to put a great deal of forethought and care and all of that in. Otherwise, it's just going to come off as unnecessary and weird. It's going to bog down the plot. So let's talk about it, I guess. There's no legit reason that I can think of to actually include it. Thematically, the book is about trying to bring family together and create something new. And like, if you really insist, incest can technically fit that definition, but like, A, why would you want to? And B, what else does it actually support in the story? The only thing that it legitimately affected was that Eliza's lawyer and like the person that she hired to help her out decided to drop her case. And that was about it. There was no real reason for them to fucking have an orgy together. I mean, it was described as an orgy. I don't really think 2 people can have an orgy. I think you have to have more, but why? They didn't have to, right? All that they actually accomplished, narratively speaking, was they wrote a book. So why couldn't they just literally write a book? It just sticks out and feels awkward. There was no reason to have it there, and it just feels like it was there for shock value. I'm fine with shock value. I've read some fucked up books. One of my favorite books is Carrion Comfort by Dan Simmons, and that is a really fucked up book, but it has a reason for all of it. It didn't feel like there was a reason for the weird fucked up shit that we found in Slapstick. It was just there for the sake of being there, for the sake of shock value. I think he really should have just chopped this portion of the book out. He wouldn't have even sacrificed very much. He would have sacrificed maybe a couple of hundred words throughout the entire book, at maximum. All he had to do was just not talk about the orgy, which only comes a couple of times, really. But like, why? Why is it there? It doesn't. He could have accomplished everything that it accomplished in a different way that was smoother for the story. Even in a story that does need to be weird and needs to have lots of weird bumps and stuff like that. It was just unnecessary. It was not demanded by the plot. It was there, but the plot didn't insist upon it being there. It just happens to happen. At least that's how it came off to me. Moving on from that, let's talk about China for a second. I do think that it is interesting that the Chinese won the technological race. This book was, released in the mid-70s, right? And that's not too long after trade relations kind of actually started up between the United States and China. I think that Vonnegut was kind of watching that and realizing that they were going to spring ahead and become very technologically advanced, as they have actually proven to in real life. Specifically, they learn how to shrink themselves. I'm pretty sure they also figured out teleportation and stuff like that too. That seems like a really weird thing, but symbolically that makes sense. I mean, think about computers, right? Think about the actual technological race that we have. It's for a long time been about trying to make everything smaller, make computers smaller. And I think that's kind of what the symbolism is there, right? The second part of it is that the Chinese are able to put their heads together. The Chinese are able to figure out the shrinking technology and other technology because they're able to actually pull together as a community to be able to take the next step forward as necessary in humanity. The United States is incapable of doing that because it refuses to allow family to come together. As expressed by Eliza and Wilbur, they were together whenever they were in physical contact. They were able to be super geniuses, but because the society around them didn't understand them, it forced him to go off to college, it forced her to go to the loony bin. If they would have been able to stay together, that probably would have helped through Wilbur's presidency, assuming that he would have gotten to the president at that point still. It could have helped drastically, and yet he wasn't allowed to. They weren't able to literally put their heads together, and so that drove the nation into decline, whereas China instead was able to literally put their heads together, which allows them to prosper. That really does sound like the exact reality that we have, just a little less hyperbolic is all. The next item here, and this is a small one, this book has introduced me to one of my favorite insults of the year, if not of the decade. Go take a flying fuck at a rolling donut. That is... I'm not the kind of guy to drop insults at people very often. I try and be as nice as possible, right? I don't fling insults because insults just are kind of useless most of the time. But my God, if I ever need to whip one out of pocket, there's a decent chance that's the one I'm reaching for. Last thing now, what was this book actually genuinely about? If we had to break it down deeply, what was Slapstick, or Lonesome No More? What was this book actually about? I think it breaks down to one pretty simple thing. Life is a tragic comedy about trying to find any kind of companionship. At the end of the day, that's what it's about. He tries to, Wilbur wants companionship from his sister and ends up losing that. He wanted companionship from all of his fellow countrymen, which is why he implemented the Lonesome No More policy, the name-changing policy. Does it actually make any sort of genuine suggestion as to how to beat it? Kind of, but again, it's thematically muddled. It makes the suggestion that some people will and some people won't. It doesn't really seem to have a pointed message. It's much more just about being lonesome and trying to find anybody to not be lonesome with. In conclusion, Kurt Vonnegut's books are always just really obtuse, kind of sloppy in a lot of ways, but still, nonetheless, I don't want to say beautiful, because that's the wrong word, but still important, still good to read. There's still good observations inside his books. He's got some really wise insights that would have been useful for a lot of people to keep in mind before we got to where we are today, but oh well, here we are. With that said, I think I am going to have to rate this with a B-. Now, despite its somewhat flawed delivery and muddled themes, the underlying message is relatable. The plot is really bizarre, and it is over the top, but I'm naturally geared to enjoy that kind of stuff. And as a bonus, it introduced me to one of my new favorite insults. Am I going to reread this book? Actually, I think I do want to. It's going to be a long time before I reread this book. This is something that I'm going to want to read again like a decade or two down the way, hopefully to see how it stands up, if its predictions were accurate, if my feelings on it hold up and all that. So yes, I think I would like to reread Slapstick one of these days. My name is Damien, by the way. I'm also an author. The Circus, an American Fantasy, was my debut novel. I also wrote half of the short stories in Portraits and Bloodlines with my father, Rick Foreman, and I'm also responsible for 666, or a play about stones and how to carry them. I sell my books online and at various markets around southern Arizona. I also sell used fiction and movies, so go to my website. You'll find a calendar for various events that I'll be attending. Thanks for your time. Have a good one.